Hey everybody, what is going on? This is Scott Garber back in the saddle of the Profluent Sports Podcast, where we are highlighting founders, investors, executives across the sports business landscape. Today, guys, we have a doozy where we are going to be bringing in my man Scott Goldman to talk about his baby AIQ and the psychology of athletes. But it's not my story to tell. So Scott, my man, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I hear like two Scots is always better than one. So this is great.
Listen, I knew I liked this guy the moment we got on the line here, and a good conversation it's going to be. Scott, look at as we go into this, I think it's so important to understand, the person at the helm, your origin story. How did you get into this space of, psychology and athletes and ultimately the birthplace of AIQ? Give us a little insight to who you are, my man.
Sure. So I've always been fascinated by sports. I was a pretty active player growing up, and nowhere near the elite level of players that I currently engage with on a day-to-day basis right now, but made it all the way to playing semi-professional soccer in New York. And I was playing semi-professional soccer while also getting my degree in psychology. And I think it was sort of like, how do I combine these two to do something really cool? And sometimes I tell people it's almost like those old Reese's commercials where the peanut butter and the chocolate kind of collided. Discover this world of sports psych, and it's just been an absolute amazing journey being able to help people at the elite space perform and get the best out of what they do.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we're coming off a really cool open where there was a lot of attention put on, sort of the psychology side, specifically in golf, and we're going to get into it. But, I want to level set, AIQ, I've heard about it in the ecosystem just from dealing with, pro teams. But let's give the listeners a little insight to what exactly have you guys built? What does AIQ stand for? And then we'll sort of build from there.
Yeah, so AIQ stands for Athletic Intelligence Quotient. And, it's really trying to think how to really summarize it. So my partner, Jim Bowman, and I, we got together and we just said, hey, they measure how big, strong, and fast players are. They measure and watch game films so they know what kind of experience or, what kind of knowledge base of their sport they have. They measure their personalities. How do they go about understanding people solving the unsolvable puzzle of sport, right? So what's the intelligence factor, if you will? So my partner Jim and I, we spent about 15 years really kind of taking on what are the cognitive abilities, what are the aspects of intelligence that people need to solve constantly mutating, evolving puzzles. So we looked at military, first responders, firefighters, in addition to athletes. So, and thanks for letting me kind of go a little bit deep on this, but if you think about a quarterback who approaches, like, I don't know how many people know this on your podcast, the listeners, but when a quarterback approaches the line of scrimmage, the headphone goes off 16 seconds before the play starts. And a lot of defenses will shift. And so you have first what the head coach calls, but then you have confusion from the defense. And then you have this quarterback who's now got to accept or reject the play call based off of what the defense is showing them. I mean, it's a really complicated thing. That pre-snap analysis, for example, is predominantly a cognitive ability, and it's multifactorial, right? Like, do you remember what you studied throughout the week? So there's a recall component. Then there's the visual scanning, like, okay, I'm identifying the mic, I'm identifying the safeties, I'm looking at the DB coverage, and all of a sudden now I'm watching a guy kind of drop in the box or drop out of the box. Maybe you watch the edge rusher out of the corner of your eye and you're trying to anticipate what kind of stunt he might engage in. So there's all of these kind of live time puzzles, and that's just football. I mean, you can do the same thing with basketball, get a rebound and transition, soccer, baseball, etc. So the AIQ was meant to help kind of understand the player and how they do what they do. From an intellectual standpoint. Yeah.
No, I think it's really interesting. And, we're going to get to the sort of the youth side of it, right? Like, I know you're working with teams like the Cubs and the Vikings and like this extensive tenure across the Big Four or Big Five. But, I'm curious before we go, sort of like face first into that, spending so much time in these pro locker rooms and, getting to work with these elite folks, like, there's always this conversation of what separates good athletes from great athletes. And I'm curious, as you guys now are able to put data and a score associated with this, are there attributes that stick out that separate the good from the great, or like how do you guys think about that after such a tenure in the space?
Yeah, gosh, that's a great question. Great question. I think that there is not a whole lot of universal truths. For every time you talk about like height matters. So let's just go with basketball for a second. Height matters in basketball, right? Especially when it comes to rebounding. However, once you're taller than 6'8", the height statistic no longer becomes a predictor of the number of rebounds you can get. Similarly, you have guys like Spud Webb or Muggsy Bogues, that's some old school name references there, of guys that are
Yep.
5'5" and below. They're my heroes because I'm 5'6", that found ways to navigate the league. You go, okay, physical is definitely an important factor, but it's not the only factor. And then you go, okay, well, what about experience? So talk about grabbing a defensive lineman from Georgia. Like that's a great program. That coaching staff's unbelievable. And so they're developing really good defensive line knowledge. And then you have personality, right? Like, TJ McConnell, who is with the Indiana Pacers, had a great run this year in the playoffs. Guy from Arizona. We spent some time together when I was at the university. Like, what an unbelievable warrior spirit. I mean, his
Yeah.
work ethic, great locker room guy. So there's that personality. And then you've got what we've got, which is the intelligence part. What's amazing is, and we're the only instrument out there right now that has a white paper published. And just to explain why that's important, a white paper is one that's not generated by the company. In fact, the primary authors that went through a rigorous academic process to get published are independent from us. And not only do we have one white paper, we have five. Three of them relate to key predictors in the NFL performance, on field performance. So, like with quarterbacks, their QBR ratings, their turnover rates, their big throw capabilities, rushing yards, TDs, passing yards. Like, I mean, really important stuff. And we have other factors in the NFL, things like tackles for losses and turnovers and rushing yards and running backs and everything. And then so three are in the NFL, one's in NBA with player efficiency rating, effective field goal rate, and then one's in Major League Baseball with key hitting and pitching statistics. So when you think about the complicated, and sorry, your question really stimulated a
No,
lot
this is
here.
great.
When
Go. Keep
when
going.
when you think about the complicated formula of how athletes are successful, you just can't attenuate to one factor. So I'll give you a great story, a classic example. This was back in the day when Russell Wilson popped. One
Yep.
of the things that everybody thought what a hidden gem he was because of his hand size. He had fairly large hands for his personal size, and they said, well, he won't turn the ball over, he can throw a tight spiral. So he's great in Seattle because of the weather. Well, after they won the Super Bowl and everybody was kind of tiled into their hand size, quarterback hand size, there was a quarterback by the name of EJ Manuel, who a
Yep.
lot of people didn't think was going to be a top pick, third, fourth round projection. The Buffalo Bills take him in the first round, and the rumor around the league was it had all to do with his hand size being the largest hand size of that draft class, and Buffalo being, similar to Seattle as far as being weather influence. So I always think that's an
Interesting.
interesting story, right? Where you just can't attenuate to one detail.
Yeah.
And you don't, so the same way you don't want to write a player off for having maybe certain like a guy who's not very big, strong, or fast, you also don't want to over attenuate to a guy who has certain physical abilities or advantages. Like, man, his get off is supreme. So I think well informed people have a tendency to make really smart decisions.
Mm.
And sometimes when I'm talking to a head coach or a GM, I'll say, like, look, their intelligence, it exists whether you're aware of it or not. It's no different than, say, like the couch in your apartment. If you turn the lights on or off, the couch is there.
Yep.
Similarly, if you want to know this person's intelligence, then you can do some cool things. Like you can put them in better positions of success. You can teach them more efficiently. Like you can just be more dynamic with that person. So why wouldn't you want to know that? It just feels like a no-brainer.
So let me ask you this. Like, this is an interesting train of thought, but we talk about the physical side of the body that we can get bigger, faster, stronger, but there is a ceiling, sort of genetically that you can max up to. When you think about mental skills, are they trainable? Is this intelligence something that's malleable and, there is no ceiling, or is it subjective to each individual? Like, how do you guys infer that, based off of sort of the baselines that you guys are collecting with AIQ?
So my answer to that question is always like yes with a but or no with an if. And what I mean by that is If you take a more conservative approach to the science of intelligence and intelligence theory, then intelligence is one of the most genetically stable traits that we have. It tends to kind of solidify at the age of 16, and then it starts to decline at the age of 35. So within the realm of pro sports, most professional athletes are between that 16 to 35. If you're an analytic driven team, for example, you love the concept of intelligence being a genetically stable trait because now you can put that into your algorithm and you can really kind of have a nice fixed number to go into that formula. That's why we were able to get all of those meaningful, statistically significant correlations I was talking about earlier. Argument one is intelligence is a stable trait, and it is what it is. No different than my height, right? With that said, just because it's a stable trait, it doesn't mean that you can't impact output. In fact, once you know what that stable trait is, you can absolutely impact output. Same way, again, I'm 5'6". I don't know why I keep mentioning my height with you, but apparently it's a sensitive subject for me today. But like if the nature of the task is for me to get something from the top shelf, it doesn't mean I can't do it. It just means I need like a ladder or a chair or something to help bridge that gap. Similarly, if someone has kind of a concrete AIQ profile, it doesn't mean that they can't do the task. It just means they have to compensate, like maybe with a work ethic or a specifically designed way of teaching or coaching the player. So that's camp one that says, hey, it's stable and we can work with it. Camp two is where you start to hear about some relatively new kind of buzzworthy concepts like neuroplasticity, that we
Hmm.
can do brain training. And there's lots of teams that have mind labs or mind gyms where they will run people through cognitive gauntlets in the attempt to improve things like processing speed and visual spatial conceptualization and stuff like that, decision making. What's interesting is there's been a few products that do that brain training stuff. And
Yep.
when they AIQ'd the player and then ran them through the gauntlet and then AIQ'd the player post brain training, the AIQ score did not change. Same thing when
Really?
teams did that. Yeah. And there was one NFL team that I worked with personally and with the AIQ where we had a huge mind gym. It was probably $800,000 worth of equipment, vision goggles and three-dimensional rooms that were supposed to help improve process speed, and the AIQ scores did not change. So I'm not saying that
Fascinating.
those products didn't work, but it did seem to side with the idea that intelligence is a more stable trait.
Interesting. And I want to go into sort of like as we start to understand this baseline score, it's a train the trainer model, right? And so like how do you scale with coaches and how do you take this data and then actually put it to use? But before we go there, I'm like this is a personal question, right? But like when we think about an athlete's cognitive makeup, what are some of the things that like we misunderstand, right? That might not show up on tape or that end up breaking careers. Like you always hear about this sort of off the field. Like I'm curious if anything sticks out to you, like through the testing that you guys have done. Like, do you find a correlation between some of these things that aren't on tape that actually end up causing the athlete to wind down their career early?
Yeah. So another great question. Thank you. I think one of the things that's frequently misunderstood is the old adage they either don't know or they don't care.
Mm,
Something that I'll talk a lot about with coaches is most coaches, almost all of them, were once players. They're former players. And they love the game so much that they want to stay in the building and stay with the sport as long as they can. However, not all players become coaches. So there's already a relationship dynamic just from that concept alone, especially at the pro space where there's so many external rewards like the money, the fame, the fortune, the women, the cars, everything. So what happens is when you're watching this relationship dynamic between the coach and the player, frustration can occur when mental errors happen. And the
mhm.
idea is like, well, do you love the game or do you not love the game? And it's like, well, what if it's not about their love of the game? What if it's more about, say, like a learning disability? So going back to the adage of they either don't know or they don't care, I find most coaches have a tendency to default to they don't care. When in reality, I think sometimes the situation is they don't know or they don't process. So,
Interesting.
and I've got case studies galore, but I have found what's beautiful about the AIQ, and when I use it like as a practitioner for the teams I work for, one of the things that's awesome is we can unstick a player, we can unstick a relationship. There's something called recency bias and confirmation bias, which happens a
Yeah.
lot in sports, right? Where what happens is a player makes a mistake or an error, and then the coach is just convinced. So even if the player does 10 things right and then commits another error, they're like, see, I told you. And so having some additional data that helps people understand. So I'll give you a great example. One of our cognitive abilities that we measure, one of the aspects of intelligence that we measure, has a lot to do with scanning. The ability to scan, the ability to make quick and accurate decisions. So we call it
Mm.
multiple target search. It's all about just scanning and reading. So again, that's reading the defense. If you're a quarterback, if you're a center midfielder, it's reading where to deliver the through pass to the forward. If you're basketball, think transition and you initiating as the primary ball handler and where to distribute the pass and everything. So these are complicated things. And when an error occurs, it might be because their multiple target search is low. So they just can't see the minute details. So what's nice with the AIQ profile is we don't just give you a number. We help guide you in understanding how the player functions out there, how they go about tackling the task. So you were asking like how do teams kind of use it? If I were to give you a chronological, the first step is in pre-talent selection, right? So I always think goodness of fit is everything. We
Mhm.
as a team, we should be good letting a player go be good for someone else if we know they're not going to be great for us. So here's a concrete example. When I was at the University of Michigan, our passing game coordinator, Coach Fish, Jed Fish, he's now the head coach at the University of Washington. Unbelievable guy, great brain. So he and I are going over some AIQ data about a wide receiver. And the AIQ data showed that he was a pretty concrete thinker. And Coach Fish loved multiple option decision tree routes. So wide receivers that get at the line of scrimmage, they read the defense and what the defense is giving them, and then it has to be on the same page with the quarterback as they make a decision between which of the different routes to run on a tree. And this guy's multiple target search, his ability to scan and look for those details, it just would have been hard for him to do some of that recognition.
Mhm.
So I said to Coach Fish, I think he's going to have a hard time. And he said, well, what could we do? I go, well, you could do like bubble screens. You throw some, just 3 yard passes and just have them run to daylight, kind of like what you see Jamar Chase and Tyreek Hill do in the NFL. Because this guy
Yep.
was really athletic. He goes, well, what if I don't want my offense to be like that? I go, well, we could flip him to the defensive side and make him a copycat corner, make him a defensive back. So we talked to the defensive back coach. Sure enough, he needed a person, so we flipped him. Now, here's where I think this becomes a real success story. We saved a lot of frustration for the coach. We saved a lot of frustration for the player. The player ended up getting drafted, I think it was third or fourth round. So I don't know if he makes it to the league because that's a bad fit offensive system, right? So step one is goodness of fit in that pre-talent selection moment. Where do we put this guy?
Real quick before you go to number two,
Of course,
how often do you see players that are highly skilled just not in the right position? Do you see that quite a bit?
well, think of it this way: as you kind of keep matriculating up, it's almost like a pyramid, right? Like you got high school athletes, college athletes, professional athletes, Hall of Famers, like and it keeps going up, 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 right? At some point, the physical qualities negate, they
Yeah.
offset. So, when you look at the college level, fast guys really stand out. Their breakaway speed really stands out. But as you get to college, all of a sudden it's like the really fast guys can kind of still break away, but and then you get to the pro level, like the NFL, and it's like everybody's big, everybody's strong, everybody's fast. So I find here's another kind of success story, which kind of gets to the next part. But there was a guy, an LSU wide receiver, and I was working for an NFL team, and he was a punt returner. And he was an amazing punt returner at LSU. And I said, his AIQ profile suggests he might kind of struggle, he might dance around a little bit. And they're like, well, we don't see that on film at LSU. And I was like, well, LSU special teams, I mean, they were a dominant team when he was on there. I go, probably a brick wall, hard edge. This guy just uses his athleticism and breakaway speed. In the NFL, when all that's going to be taken away. So by week 8, week 9, the assistant GM called me and said, you called it. I said, what do you mean? He goes, we had to take him off kickoff duty. I said, why? And he's like, he was dancing around. He was doing exactly what you described. And I said, yeah. I said, the way that he processes the game, with the game speeding up, it's going to negate his athleticism and it's going to expose some of these deficits. So again,
Okay, I got
yeah,
to interrupt. I'm so
please.
curious. Like, this is a cool inflection point because at that moment in time, like, like you're talking about how we process situations, right? And then there's this huge idea that athletes transition so well into the workplace, right? So I'm curious, how transferable is that AIQ score from not just what's going on in the offense or defensive scheme, but like how transferable is that into other real life situations outside of the ice or court or field that you're playing on?
Great question. So it's interesting because there's lots of aspects of intelligence beyond just what we measure. So I would say it's kind of does the AIQ translate and transfer to corporate space? It does. But is it universal or comprehensive? It is not. And I want to be
Yeah.
fair. I think something that I've really staked my reputation and my career on is I'm not going to say yes to everything if it's not a good fit or a good match. What is interesting though, and I would want to emphasize this, is there is a guy. He's got a he's made a couple of $1 billion, and now he's got a VC fund, and he only takes athletes that have high AIQ scores. Like he calls me up, he's like, "Hey, do you know so and so? Can I see his AIQ score?" And I'm always like, "Well,
Interesting.
I got to talk to the person first, so I'll and reach out to the athlete and go, "Hey, how do you feel?" And then I share it and I go over it with this guy because he's like, "I'm only going to invest in athletes with good AIQ scores." I do believe that there is an entrepreneurial space for the AIQ, and there is an opportunity to pull from some of the captures that we're measuring.
No, and I think that it's been an overgeneralization for a long time, but as we get more nuanced in it, again, I think we watch a lot of folks finish their career and maybe they find their right spot on the field, which is very challenging to do. But then it becomes sort of like starting from ground zero to go try and find your right spot as you transition out of the game. And I think that it's incredibly challenging. So I was just curious the correlation there. Before we sort of dive into AIQ plus and sort of like the expansion of where you see this going, I always heard about the Wonderlic test. Like that was always sort of like the generic one. And I could never really understand how this one test would correlate. I'm curious, does this start to serve as an evolution of some of that baseline testing when we see it at the combine? Or like how do you guys fit within, the draft? How do you fit within sort of that sort of pre-scout that you were talking about as the space continues to get more complex and evolved?
Yeah. So the Wonderlic was based off of a theory from 1934, and it's more about logical reasoning. Tommy can sit next to Jane, Jane can sit next to Lisa. Where does Dave sit? Kind of stuff. And it only gives you one number, and you don't really even know like what the spread of that is. So like if like in sports we know that 21 beats 17 on the scoreboard every time, but in the world of like understanding human behavior, which is really complicated, is 21 over 17, like is that 4 points? Is that a meaningful difference or not?
Mm.
So what we've done is we've just become a lot more sophisticated. So where they have one number, we have 15 points of data, where you don't know if 17 is greater than 21, to what degree of an import. We really highlight that. Additionally, where they just kind of have almost like a pass fail mentality, and it's also language based, so there's a lot of cultural bias and stuff. Like we don't have any cultural bias, it's not language based, because we wanted to be able to measure and accurately capture people's true cognitive abilities, whether they're from like rural Iowa or inner city Miami or even Australia or Africa or Asia. So it's just a much more sophisticated device. Now on top of that, with the AIQ, I leveraged a bunch of the relationships that I had with coaches at the NFL and MLB and NBA levels, and we had them help us come up with ways of describing. So not only are we sport specific and position specific, but we're also very coach friendly, where it's like, okay, well, what does multiple target search mean to me as a coach for when I'm working with this? So we
Mm.
talked a lot about the talent selection part, but the player development and player placement, I would say, is equally valuable, if not more. So it's like, now that you've got the player, what do we do with them? I've always found really good coaches, they figure out what their players can do, and great coaches figure it out faster. And I think the AIQ, like one coach said this to me, he goes, "Man, I feel like I'm running a 100-meter race and you've given me 20-meter head start on the process."
Isn't that interesting? And I Totally agree with that assessment. I think so often you're trying to take guesses with what you've been given, but you don't have a quantitative way to go ahead and start to make some of those decisions and move with confidence, which ultimately allows you to move with speed. Just with time, a couple more questions here, and then we're going to start to bring this thing home. But Scott, you guys are, I imagine, collecting a lot of really unique data points, right? And as we move into the world of AI and, large language models, we see that you guys have launched AIQ Plus. Talk to me about how you guys are leveraging some of the tools and intelligence modalities that are out there to help either provide deeper insights. How are you guys thinking about the marriage of those two?
Oh my gosh. So I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am about this next chapter. We gave the AIQ Plus over 297 documents about sport specific intelligence. That's where we started. Then we gave it our 15,000 plus reports across all five major leagues, across all of the different sports that we work with. So we gave them all of it, the 15,000 reports. Then I asked some NFL coaches that were friends, they gave me their playbooks. So we fed it the playbook so it would understand. Like, I don't know if you remember that movie, The Matrix, with Neo, right?
Of course, yeah.
So you know that part where he's downloading all the martial arts and he's like, I know Kung Fu.
Yep.
That's what we did with this thing is we gave it massive amounts of information. It took it like 3 minutes to digest and was like, I know Kung Fu. So what's super cool is you can ask the AIQ Plus all kinds of questions like compare Patrick Mahomes to Josh Allen. And it'll do that. It'll say things like, what would be the best way to develop Drake May? And it'll give you this super cool analysis with coaching tips that, again, come from actual NFL coaches. I mean, it just does all this amazing thing. You can even say, given your database, who would you say this year's running back class, running back X from this year's class, who does he remind you of from the database? And it'll say, like, based off his AIQ profile, this guy his profile is very similar to like Saquon Barkley, stuff like
Yeah.
that. So it does all this amazing stuff from talent development to talent selection. I mean, it's really neat to watch it process information. Like we did this for one of the teams that I work with. We had a rookie quarterback debate. Should we go with this quarterback or that quarterback? And so I asked the coach, I said, hey, what kind of style of offense are you planning on? And he, talked about this kind of hybrid West Coast kind of thing. So I put it in the AIQ Plus exactly how he described the offense that he wanted to run. And I said, who's the quarterback that best matches in this draft class to this style of offense? And it ranked it in order, like first, second. This quarterback really matches well. This quarterback second, third, fourth, and they ended up taking the quarterback that was number one on the AIQ Plus's report. It was neat to watch that just evolve in live time.
Listen, man. I mean, for all of you directors of scouting, you guys better get close and cuddly with AIQ because this is the evolution, and I think it's really interesting, just the processing power. And it's always interesting from our side. We see so many of these agents and platforms built with public data. It's very interesting when you guys start to go ahead and have decades of private data, and now it's able to go ahead and calibrate to something very unique. Look at, I know you guys are in the scale mode. You're raising capital. What does the future of AIQ look like? And as you continue to, go year over year in profitability, like what do you want to share with the market as you guys continue to scale up?
Yeah. So we are at it's such an exciting time for us as a company because again, we started off, it was just two of us. And really we put so much time in just being good practitioners, good psychologists, and really develop. Like it took us 15 years to even develop this because we wanted to follow the American Psychological Association's ethical guideline of test construction. So we really put a lot of time and attention on having a great product. We never thought about building a business around it. So about 2, 3 years ago, we were like, you know what? If we're going to do this, we should do it right. So we built a business around it. That meant we added business development and a CEO and all of these other kinds of pieces. And what's been amazing is, like, if I showed you all of the teams that we're working with, again, it's not just North America, it's Australia, it's Europe. So English Premier League teams, Aussie rules football. So sorry, let's be specific. We're across all five major leagues in North America: NFL, NBA, MLS, NHL, and MLB. Right?
Yep.
Then we're in the English Premier League in Europe. We're in Australia, New Zealand. We're with Aussie rules football, rugby, etc. So what happened was now all of a sudden we're growing, and people, like, when they look at all of the active contracts they have, they're like, how do you guys manage all of that? And it's like, well, what's the old adage? If you want to get stuff done, ask a busy person. So we
Yeah.
just grind, like we're grinders. So to your point, just from like a financial output, our profit margin this year is our best year to date. And last year was our best year to date prior to this year's breaking that. And the year before that. So our growth curve for the last 5 years has been better, 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 better. And like we're still growing. So I think what we're really excited about is turning this company into something massive where it becomes the dominant factor of understanding sports specific intelligence. And we can even go outside of sports too. Like we actually work with an Air Force base. We work with a fire department. So there's a special forces unit in Texas Missouri, that works with us. And so it's just one of those things where I'm just super excited about where this thing can go and how many people it can help, both in breadth and in depth of enhancement.
No, it's really cool to see, and I mean, we may have to bring you back on for a part two because we see it from our lens that as we commercialize sports younger and younger, I imagine setting that baseline, understanding where the athletes are both at from a physical trajectory but also an intelligence trajectory can really sort of help have the athletes peak at the right time in the right position. And we're watching this hyper specialization happen right now, and we question quite a bit, is that the best thing to be peaking when you're 9, 10, 11 years old, when the reality is, like you said, that 16 to 35 is sort of that sweet spot. And so excited to go ahead and watch as you guys continue to expand, how that dictates the evolution of the athlete. Scott, I'm going to switch gears real quick, and it'll be the last question that we bring it home with. I don't know if you're able to speak to it, but over the 15 years that you've been building, what athlete or athletes stick out to you as the most intelligent that you've had the privilege of working with?
Ooh. So we do not share the names without their permission. With that said, there have been some historical individuals that have been kind enough to say, yeah, dude, you want to tell the world this? What's funny is their agents, they love it when we talk about them because it helps generate some heat, right?
Sure.
So here are some players that gave us permission to talk about them and some things that are fairly unique about them. We'll start at the quarterback position. One person was Justin Fields, who his ability to recall information, he ceilinged out. And what I mean by that was he got a perfect score on our recall. So, we asked him to memorize, 16 pairs. Like, let's say it's an image like an airplane with a number 17. That's a hard thing to do 16 times. He got 16 out of 16 right on the recall. Now,
Wow.
that means if we had given him 20, he might have gotten 20 out of 20. So, where does that come in? His ability to download and absorb the playbook is at an elite level. What's interesting was I was talking to his offensive coordinator and quarterback coach at one of the teams he was with, and he shared with the team, I don't need the wristband. I don't need the playbook here. I got it. And they were like,
Yeah.
well, but one of the other quarterbacks kind of does need it. And he's like, that's cool, but I don't need it. And they were like, really? And he's like, yeah. And so one of the things was sharing the AIQ gave, again, there was concern. The coaches were concerned that he was not needing it. And then if he makes a mental error, that would be like, hey, you really should have it. So the AIQ helped give him the confidence and them the confidence that when he said, I don't need it, he really didn't. So
Super
Justin
cool.
Fields is one. The other one is TJ Watt. So TJ Watt was
Wow.
kind enough to let us talk about him. What he does on the field is just unbelievable. I mean, one of the most dominant defensive ends in the league right now. And so it's when you watch him play and the way that he does things in live time. So like where Justin Fields is all about like, pre-game preparation strengths, TJ's all about in-game adjustments, stunts, splits, schemes. Like his ability to just calibrate to chaos was unreal. And then the third name that I would provide that again, agent gave permission, player gave permission is Roma Dunze, who the wide
Yeah.
receiver for the Chicago Bears. This guy, I'm really excited, especially with the way how creative Coach Ben Johnson is. Like, for those people that maybe are looking for fantasy football tips or whatever, like Roma Dunze is one that I think's a really talented early professional.
Scott, you're going to make a lot of Bear fans happy because it is a miserable existence over there. But I'm not here to get into that. But no, that's really interesting, man. I think it's, those are the behind the scenes, the deep cuts. When you think about a Watt, right? It's like, it's not just ground and pound. Like there's so much intelligence on both sides of the ball. And I think, what separates good and great to go all the way back are, those, the sophistication around it. And it's not just out muscling people, but it's outsmarting people and marrying those two, right? Almost like putting the brain and the mind together to be able to go ahead and find that harmony. Scott, what a tremendous conversation, man. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but folks that listen to this, if they want to get in touch with you, if they're interested in learning more about AIQ, engaging with you on the business side, what's the best way to get in touch?
So our website's pretty easy. It's just aiq.team. And so if you go there, there's a contact us that you can always reach out, and then you can learn about the AIQ through that. You're also welcome to just email me directly. I don't mind giving out my own email address, and that's just S Goldman. So first letter S, right? Last name Goldman at aiq.team. I answer every email and phone call that I get before the end of the day.
I love it, man. Well, from the Profluence team, thank you for all the work that you're doing in evolving and pushing the sporting ecosystem forward. And look forward to following the journey. And I might have to take an AIQ test one of these days and see where I would have stacked up if I would have made it, man. So all jokes aside, thanks for everything you're doing, and look forward to following up soon.
Thank you. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate you.
Talk soon, everybody.